first of our three speaker series talks. I'm, of course, all of you know, probably know that anyone that doesn't know, I'm Kathy Jack, and I am very happy to introduce our speaker tonight, Chris Guarnieri. Chris has been a long-time resident of Grove City. Chris also is one of our members and volunteers here at the Historical Society, and she is manages two of our rooms. She manages the community room and the school room for us. Chris has worked in the newspaper business for 22.5 years. She started at the Herald and was transferred to the main office and was transferred to the Adelaide News in 2011. She's a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution, and she was one of the American Heritage Contest national winners this year. And Chris is a talented artist. As you can see, left over from the art walk this weekend, I had Chris leave her hangings up for and some of her artwork that's around here so that everybody can enjoy it tonight that couldn't make it to the artwork. And so I'm very pleased to introduce Chris Guarnieri.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm very honored to have been invited to speak to you all today about a subject very dear to me, the Daughters of the American Revolution, the voluntary women's society which honors and preserves the legacy of our patriot ancestors. We're committed to promoting patriotism, preserving American history, and securing our future through better education for our young people. After only a brief study of my family's history, I discovered several patriot ancestors. Therefore, I decided to pursue membership in this organization whose goals reflect my own. I'm a native of Grove City, as Kathy said, having lived here most of my life. My first 6 years I spent idyllically out at Millbrook Farm, 7 miles north of here. My family moved to Grove City the summer before I began kindergarten. I earned my bachelor's degree at Grove City College, and then I moved to Ridgeway to teach. After a couple of years there, I returned to Grove City here to earn my master's degree in English. As you know, Grove City is a very special place. We used to call the bubble up the hill. We are in 10 cities nationally, or we're in the top 10 cities nationally of the best places to live, to be educated, to develop as artists or musicians, and even to become a member of a Daughter of the American Revolution. Recently, a Forbes magazine poll told that the Grove City women, Grove City College women, were the most likely to become future D.A.R. members. Founded in 1798, Grove City was not a Revolutionary War era town. Midway between Fort Pitt and Fort Crawford, there were settlements nearby, but not here. But as late as 1870, we had only 200 residents. But mining brought new development, and by the 1920s, our population had grown to near 7,000. As Grove City's population grew, so did the prosperity of our inhabitants. With that prosperity came labor-saving devices which gave housewives a little bit of leisure time. But our women here in Grove City were not idle women to sit and relax for hours over tea or coffee. These women looked to their churches and to their community to fill their leisure time with meaningful activities. After World War I ended, a small group of women joined together to discuss their ancestors. They had learned of a group of 4 women in Washington, D.C., who in 1890 had attempted to join the hereditary society, the Sons of the American Revolution. After all, their ancestors had also fought the War of Independence, but they were turned away. So the D.A.R. was and remains a male-only organization. However, one of their leaders suggested these women create an association of their own. So on October 11th, 1890, Eugenia Washington, Mary Deska, Ellen Woolworth, and Mary Lockwood founded the Daughters of the American Revolution. The objectives created in that first meeting remain the same 125 years later. First is historical. to perpetuate the memory and the spirit of the men and women who achieved our independence. Secondly, is educational, to carry out George Washington's injunction given in his farewell address to promote as an object of primary importance institutions of general diffusion of knowledge, thus developing an enlightened public opinion. And lastly, patriotic, to cherish, maintain, and extend the institutions of American freedom, to foster true patriotism and love of country, and to aid in securing all of the blessings of liberty for humankind. At the end of World War I, many women in the Grove City area felt these objectives were what they wanted for their own community. So on May 3rd, 1919, Mabel Kennedy Young and many others organized their own chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution. And on March 1st, 1920, the General Hugh Mercer chapter received its charter from the National Society. Their motto was, "The noblest motive is the public good." Now among the 60 charter members were Fanny Cat Bashline, Leonore Neal Calderwood, Florence Kennedy Blakeney, Martha James Fithian, Esther Shalito Fithian, Ida Pearsall Graham, Elsie Porker Gilmore, Julia C. Kelly, and Ida M. Hodge. Other families represented in this group were the Montgomery, the McKay, the Perry, Rogers, Ross, Regal, Gregg, and Coulter families. Also McBride, Young, Jamison. Now, for afterwards, I do have a list that have, just in case any of you are interested, there might be some of your relatives here, they have lovingly, or wonderfully included maiden names, which is so helpful if you're studying genealogy. So Mrs. William Regal, and you'll find is if you go through any of their books, they use their husbands' names. So it's very often difficult to know who these women actually were, but some of them kindly put their maiden names in parentheses. So Mrs. William Regal, or Anna Hughes, was the first chapter historian, and she presented her first chapter on General Hugh Mercer, and it is included in its entirety in their first book. So if you're interested, it is here and upstairs in our civics room. Mercer, the namesake of the chapter, was born and educated in Scotland, and he was a surgeon for Bonnie Prince Charles Edward, the so-called pretender to the British throne. Mercer was at the Battle of Culloden, and I'm sure you know how that worked out for the Scots. The rebellion having been defeated, he thought it expedient to move to the colonies. So in 1747, he arrived here and settled 72 miles southwest of Harrisburg in a town that is now Mercersburg, and maybe many of you have been there, but it originally was called Blacktown. And he served then under General Braddock as a captain in the same regiment as George Washington in 1755. Mercer was severely wounded in the French and Indian War Battle of Fort Duquesne, and once again defeated. Their troops retreated, but he was unable to keep up because he was wounded. So he spent several weeks wandering our wilderness alone before he reached Fort Cumberland, 100 miles away. 3 years later, he was promoted to lieutenant colonel, and with General John Forbes, he made his way back to Fort Duquesne, where the British were this time victorious. Mercer remained as commandant of the new Fort Pitt until the conclusion of the war. He moved to Fredericksburg, Virginia, a thriving Scots community, where he continued his medical career, and in 1767 joined the Masonic Lodge. This same lodge was the one George Washington and James Monroe both were members of. Interestingly, Washington's mother was one of Mercer's patients. And Mercer married Isabella Gordon, with whom he had 5 children. And in 1774, Washington sold his childhood home, Ferry Farm, to Mercer, who had intended to take that land and make a town of it. Sadly, hostilities broke out with the British. Mercer again answered the rebels call. And he was appointed Brigadier General of the Armies of the United Colonies, which were headquartered in New York, and they later became the Continental Army. And well, you know what happened in 1776, they were in retreat, ended in Valley Forge, but rumor has it, amongst historians, that Mercer exclusively originated the plan for Washington's crossing the Delaware to surprise the Hessians at the Battle of Trenton. So because of their success, Mercer was given a major role in the defense of Trenton. However, on January 3rd, Mercer's brigade was, pardon me? Oh, okay. Mercer's brigade encountered 2 British regiments, and in fighting, Mercer was taken, or mistaken, for Washington and ordered to surrender. He continued to fight, even though he was surrounded by British troops. He was bayoneted 7 times and left for dead near an oak tree, which remains to this day. You can go see the inscription of this oak tree about Mercer's laying the groundwork for the ultimate American victory. He was carried to a nearby house, Clark House, which is also standing to this day and is a museum. The Clark House, where he lingered for 9 days, expiring on January 12th, 1777. Numerous towns, townships, and counties have been named in honor of Mercer. And in our own Mercer, the Pennsylvania Society, the portion of the National Daughters of the American Revolution, donated a tablet to his memory, and it's still in our courthouse. You can see it today. But it reads, "In memory of General Hugh Mercer, born in Scotland, Colonel in General Forbes' expedition against Fort Duquesne, 1758, Colonel, 3rd Regiment, Virginia, 1776, Brigadier General, Continental Army, 1776, killed in battle, 1777. Now, this was erected by the Pennsylvania Historical Commission and PSS D.A.R. in honor of the soldier from whom Mercer County is named, 1917. Mercer wrote, "I'm willing to serve my adopted country in any capacity she may need me." I believe this memorial service in 1917 is what prompted the women in Grove City to create their own D.A.R. chapter. So according to the chapter's historian's report for 1919-1920, the chapter was organized by the state regent at that time, a Mrs. Anthony Wayne Cook. Her husband is the one who Cook's Forest is named for. She also became the only Pennsylvania daughter so far to have been named our national leader, our president. President General is what we call our national leader. The General Hugh Mercer chapter's first leader, or regent, was Mrs. Mabel Kennedy Young, as I said a little earlier. Their first formal act on May 28, 1920, was to perform a pageant, and all the proceeds of this pageant went to devastated France. They raised $460 at this pageant. Today, that equals $5,769.69 for one pageant. It amazed me. On July 24th of that year, they held an appreciation day for the returning World War I soldiers. They decorated a float called the Spirit of 76 for a parade in the soldiers' honors. The chapter was also given a shelf in our community library for D.A.R. literature. And the first donation, not surprisingly, was the life of General Hugh Mercer. The chapter chaplain, Mrs. M.C. Zonheiser, donated a year's subscription of the D.A.R. magazine, which today is known as the American Spirit. Dr. Maltby from Slippery Rock College donated Old Glory, and Mrs. F.M. Blakeney donated History of Northwestern Pennsylvania. Over the course of the last century, these books seem to have been given away or sold. Our veterans, though, have always been important to the daughters. This chapter purchased and had planted 26 maple trees along West Main Street. At that time it was, Grove City Mercer Road. and to commemorate the 23 young men who died from here in World War I, and 3 trees for the men who died in the Mexican border service between May 9th, 1916 and March 24th, 1917. This border war, although it never became a full-blown war with Mexico, had its casualties. And I do have a list, along with this list of the original charter members, of the young men who died in these two, the war and the border service. The Army's border service and the National Guard's border patrol engaged Pancho Villa with his paramilitary forces. And that was part of the Mexican Revolution from 1910 to 1920. On April 9th, 1921, the General Hugh Mercer Memorial, our Mercer chapter, held a memorial service for the planting of these trees. Reverend W.E. Parvis, who was the pastor of the Presbyterian Church at that time, addressed the attendees. Dr. Nye, who was pastor of the Methodist Episcopal Church, and Dr. George Robinson of the same church planted the first tree. Their total cost was $62.67. Now, today it's $784, but still, that was quite a sum for these women to raise. Mrs. Zonheiser recorded, "The ladies desire by this action to make the Mercer Grove City Road one of remembrance to the community hero dead." Now, I searched the borough records. Tanya and the borough director, all of us, they helped. We couldn't find anything. We couldn't find permission. We couldn't find any information. No petitions, no files of any kind. So we were thinking that maybe at that time there were no restrictions about the devil's strip between the sidewalks and the curb. So they planted these trees. And there is no record of them except in the D.A.R. books. Now, judging by the girths, if you were to drive out, you'll see some very, very large maple trees on West Main Street. It's roughly 100 years later, so I'm thinking those are some of the memorial planting. Now, the ladies were very busy in 1921 from that memorial planting to sending monies to support the Pennsylvania patients who were in Arizona at the Severn Tuberculosis Hospital. They also wanted to be recorded as being in favor of the Shepard-Towner bill, which became an act of Congress. Curious, I Googled the act and learned that it provided federal funding for maternity and child care. The bill was sponsored by Texas Senator Morris Shepard, who was a Democrat, and Republican Representative Horace Towner of Iowa. It was signed into law by President Harding on November 23rd, 1921, and it was the first federal venture into Social Security. The chapter ended their year, that first full year, with 73 members, so they grew with 13. During the previous year, under the auspices of Lorena Montgomery, they had begun to search Mercer County cemeteries for Revolutionary War dead and continued this venture for many years. Now, although these women most often met in each other's homes, and some chapters still do that, I understand, most often they were found at the Pengrove Hotel or the Colonial. And I know there's some information here about the Colonial. I don't know where it was, but it was an important meeting place here. So they always met in one of these two places to commemorate President's Month, and that was February. It was a patriotic event with a luncheon or sometimes a dinner, music always, and guest speakers. Right here in Grove City. Typically, their meetings consisted of the presentations of historical papers, musical entertainment, and a business meeting. I was fortunate enough when I was a college student to play piano for some of these meetings of these ladies, and sometimes it was right here. And it was nice. But they continued that for a very long time. But they also continued supporting the community through service, giving either monetary donations or time for various projects right until they disbanded between 2006 and 2007. They supported education by supplying school children patriotic paintings, such as the printings rather, such as copies of the American Creed. Interestingly, these women, very well educated women, had a wide variety of interests. Some of the papers they presented were famous gardens, Indian trails of western Pennsylvania, Christmas in colonial times, Millbrook community, Mayflower pilgrims, Theodosia Burr and her father, education of children in New England, the history of our flag and its proper use, old colonial bed quilts and counterpanes, the spiritual regeneration and basics of world construction, the immigrant tide and its problems for us, that apparently is a 100-year-old problem. At the end of 1925-26 year, Mrs. Riegel, who is Anna Hughes, wrote, "Whether it is loyalty to the memory and spirit of those who gave us liberty and independence, or whether it is helping such institutes as Marysville College, the Berry School for Girls, Tomassi School, these are all D.A.R. founded and funded schools, or our own Grove City College, or extending help to brighten the waiting time of the immigrant at Ellis Island, or encouraging pupils of our own public schools in patriotism and love of country. The General Hugh Mercer chapter has shown its earnestness and sincerity in pursuing the objects for which it exists. And their fundraising efforts are impressive. This year, the year of the crash, they purchased D.A.R. bonds of $1,700. A bake sale garnered $54.50. They gave $50 for a Valley Forge window, and all totaled this year, they raised $40.52. And again, in today's currency, $30,542.01. So by the end of that year, they had enrolled 94. Also, they had lost 2 founding members, Roberta Firth McKay, the first treasurer, and Mabel Kennedy Young, their first regent. And in September of '29, Lorena Montgomery, instrumental in the search for buried Revolutionary patriots here in Mercer County, was elected to represent the General Hugh Mercer chapter in the newly formed Mercer County Historical Society, whose first president was Grove City College's own Dr. D.A.R. Now, Ms. Montgomery chaired the historical research committees, not only there, but also here in the D.A.R., and she, along with several of the General Hugh Mercer chapter members, visited 30 old cemeteries. She recorded 974 Revolutionary War soldiers who were granted donation lands here. She also discovered 811 soldiers of the War of 1812 who were also enlisted in these donation lands. She found 30 pensioners of the Revolution who actually moved here and lived here. For her hard work in D.A.R., our state regent gave her the highest commendations for her genealogical work here in Mercer County. All of Lorena's work was compiled and bound. After her death on February 4th, '47, her family donated their copy of these records to the volumes, to the Grove City Community Library, where unfortunately they were subsequently thrown away by a librarian who saw no value in genealogy. Fortunately, however, the D.A.R. is not so short-sighted. We have her records, all of her records, in our archives in Washington. So they are not lost, as I thought, and some people heard. I was quite upset with that. But our historical society also has these volumes here. These are her actual typed records. They consist of the Revolutionary War soldiers. They consist of some wills. They also have the names of their daughters and where they were from, where they were buried. So these are available for your research if you need them. Welcome to them. Our state organizing secretary, who is here today, also told me that there is a lot of boxed information in the Mercer County Historical Society, so all is not lost. We still have a lot of her information. Now, I wanted to tell you though, so, you might know some of these names, the Revolutionary War soldiers' graves she found: Joffre Ball, John Arnold, Daniel Harper, William Amberson, Joseph Junkin, William Doherty, Elisha Fox. Now, these names I recognized from my own research. I thought maybe they might be familiar to you. Others are here. Lorena and her helpers also located several graves of these men's daughters. So we have Martha Finley Junkin, Elizabeth Harper Ball, Mary Harper Fee, Sarah McDowell Brandon, Catherine McDowell Courtney, and Sarah Brandon McDowell. There's an Elizabeth Carringer McCartney, it's from Perry Township, Nancy Amberson Flake. She's buried over in Old Citizens in Mercer. Margaret McCombs Marquis, I don't know if you all know the McComb Auto people and the McComb Oil people, but I imagine this connected there. She's buried in Lackawanna. Back to local here, 1934, Lorena and her committee had transcribed 4,200 tombstone inscriptions dated between 1802 and 1882. They also located and copied old wills and other courthouse records in order to establish as many as possible records of Revolutionary War soldiers, pioneers in Mercer County. The historian wrote that each of these cemeteries, they held appropriate memorial services, and then the ladies marked the graves as the Revolutionary War soldiers, and the daughters also. In the late 20s, the General Pew Mercer chapter had a state officer, and she was our state historian, of whom they were proud, Mrs. H.A. White. Also, during this time, there was a radical anti-American teaching spreading throughout public education system, and the daughters increased their patriotic efforts in our schools, teaching about the Constitution in assemblies, distributing copies of the American Creed, and even teaching children, and I quote this historian, the marching, fighting songs of the Revolution to drown out the marching songs of the Red. They sponsored American history essays in 8th grade classes and gave out, at that time it was $45 in medals, with the first and second place to the highest ranking student in an exam that they proctored. They were here in Grove City and in Greenville. Now, 1950s, Rocco Poneray was often the recipient of this medal. Amazing was the ability of these women during the Depression years to create a scholarship for young women attending Grove City College. Their fundraising efforts continued to average more than $2,000 or $200 a year, which, you're looking at $2,500 at that time annually. And also odd for a group of women to donate in our memorial park, the war memorial area. I'm sure you have seen the large machine gun. When I was a child, I thought it was a cannon. That machine gun, the French 75, was purchased and donated by the General Hugh Mercer chapter members. They presented it to Grove City on Memorial Day 1930. The mayor at that time, W.G. Smith, accepted the donation. The machine gun remains there. You can see it, and also the plaque that the D.A.R. donated. It has all their information on that. And these women annually also presented programs to Grove City high school students during what has now become known as Constitution Week. September 17, 1787, as you know, was the signing date of the Constitution. But it wasn't until 1955, and through the efforts of the National Society Daughters of the American Revolution, that this became a nationally celebrated event. D.A.R. petitioned Congress to dedicate September 17th through 23rd each year to commemorate Constitution Week. On August 2nd, 1956, President Dwight Eisenhower signed the resolution into Public Law number 915. The observance is trifold. A, to encourage the study of historical events which led to the framing of the Constitution. B, to inform people that the Constitution is the basis for our great heritage and foundation, the foundation of our way of life. And lastly, to emphasize our U.S. citizens' responsibility to defend, protect, and preserve the Constitution. I also have here a handout for you from our National Society, which describes a little bit more about Constitution Week, which incidentally started this past Saturday and will end Wednesday. Also in the 1930s, the Constitution was apparently under attack again by anti-American forces, but this time in government. So each September of that decade, the gentlemen, these women asked to speak to both their chapter and to the high school, emphasized the need to preserve the Constitution. And I'm pleased to tell you that we continue to celebrate this important document annually in each of our chapters, locally, regionally, and nationally. This decade also saw the enrollment of this chapter soar to 108, but that wasn't its highest number yet. In 1940, the women conducted a public poster contest in the local schools. They had a winner, but that's all they tell us about it. I was all excited to learn. I wanted to know, do we still have this poster? What did it look like? Who won? And they just wanted us to know that they had a contest and we had a winner. The National Society, the president also had at that time, we always have a President General's project for the 3 years she is in office. And at that time, there was much deforestation due to the need for fuel, the need for shipbuilding, house building, etc. So the general president's project at that time was reforestation, and they were called the penny pines, and you might have heard of them. This was new to me, I think. I don't remember, I'm sorry. But I think it was new to me. Mrs. Henry M. Robert, who was the president for general at that time, wanted the penny projects to lead up to the Golden Jubilee in 1941. So each chapter across the country was asked to donate enough pines to plant 1 acre. It was $5 for the entire chapter to donate 500 trees. The Civilian Conservation Corps, as you might remember, young men between 18 and 25 actually did the planting. And the General Humorous chapter donated their $5 acre in memory of Mrs. Agnes Firth, one of the originating charter members. These trees are planted near Warren, and I understand are still standing. Altogether, D.A.R.'s Pennsylvania chapters donated 106 acres of trees, which have grown to over 150 acres of trees, and all of them are in our Allegheny National Forest. This memorial tree or forest was planted with 75,000 trees. There were 2 separate dedications on May 25th, 1940 and June 21st, 1941. And in 1991, a young woman named Heather Coach wrote in one of our D.A.R. magazines that she found a little pocket of trees planted in 1931 dedicated to the memory of George Washington near Potter City out in Coudersport, or near Coudersport. There's a memorial marker there if anybody cares to look at it. Or it'd be a nice drive someday. In January 41, historian Mrs. Fanny Bashline noted during their meeting, the town held its first air raid, or air raid alarm. So apparently, even in 41, the war in Europe was touching us here, an air raid alarm. It was a surprise for me to hear we had those. D.A.R. honored chapter's members' relatives who were serving in World War II. The National Society asked each of the members that they would donate $1 for plasma, for blood plasma, which was donated in the service person's name. And General Hugh Mercer chapter members donated $100, which was more than 100% response for their numbers were at that time only 95. So the ladies also observed during the entire war a minute of silent prayer each day at 1 o'clock for those in service of our country. Saving stamps and war bonds were purchased, and additionally, canceled stamps were sent to our national headquarters for various war projects. And they donated to the American Red Cross. So you can see they're very community service-oriented women. The following year, 1942, General Hugh Mercer chapter celebrated Grove City's centennial by holding an antique exhibit in the community library between August 22nd and 28th. The antiques all belonged to the members of the society. They charged 25 cents for viewing each time. They netted $126, so that was more than 500 people to view this sesquicentennial event. They donated all that money back to the Grove City Community Sesquicentennial Committee to be used here in town. By 49, the members reached a grand total of 112. In October of that year, Mrs. Henry Lindbergh, some of you may remember her, and Mrs. Garfield Hodge were received as new members. In learning from the historian's report, we have in the civics room upstairs, the 1950s, a frequent speaker was one of my favorite professors at college, Dr. Josephine Roberts. Now, I didn't actually have her as a professor. I took care of her at Grove Manor, but she took me under her wing just as much as I had been one of her students. And she was suffering from the devastations of multiple sclerosis, but her mind was still sharp as a tack. And we had many wonderful, wonderful visits. They should have been caring for her, but they just were more like visits. She was just a wonderful lady, and I still consider her one of my mentors. Now, throughout this decade, speakers again warned of the dangers of communism in world government. In the 4th decade of their chapter, these women began distributing copies of the D.A.R. citizenship manuals in Mercer to anyone who was applying for citizenship. And they received these from the Prothonotary. And I had intended to call the Prothonotari's office to see if they are still there. Do you know, Connie?
I don't know if they are.
If we're still distributing any. But they did for a long time create.
They continued that until they started doing the citizenship. They moved it from Mercer down to Pittsburgh, and they do it down in Pittsburgh now. But up until 10 or 15 years ago, it hasn't been that long that they continue to do that.
Thank you. They also distributed to the schools pictures of Independence Halls, and to each student they distributed a copy of the Declaration of Independence. Also, 3,000 pieces each year of the Smokey Bear literature was donated or distributed to the school children. So for over 80 years, the Grove City's General Hugh Mercer chapter served area communities. But as it will happen, the original chapter members passed, and the patriotism in our country, as you know, in the 60s began to decline, and apathy began to rule. So by 2006, the chapter was disbanded. So I'm sure you're wondering, is D.A.R. still valid today? It's a patriotic society. But after 125 years, our organization remains a growing, vibrant group of women in the ages between 18 and 100. We do indeed have centenarians who are actually still active. Yes, we come to this organization because our ancestors fought for independence. They had the chutzpah of a David facing a Goliath. But we remain because we're interested in our communities, in helping where and however we can. We not only honor our fallen war dead, we also care for our living veterans, aiding them in whichever way each individual chapter feels as they can best meet these needs as they see them crop up. From simply spending time with area veterans to financial donations to defray living and medical expenses, we support our current soldiers. In fact, recently, we're very proud of this, we made the Guinness Book of World Records by sending letters to active duty soldiers. And that said, we also serve our communities in a variety of ways. Some of us help with historic research product. Others help create community gardens. We help with our church groups and in various other charitable works. We continue through all of this to stress the ideals of our founding fathers through educational outreach programs which teach about our flag, our country, our history. And in conclusion, I'd like to read what Mrs. Ruth Albright wrote in her historian summary of the year 3940. And her words speak eloquently of our own duties and responsibilities as citizens today. In times of either national or world emergencies, our society has always been awake to its responsibilities. In this period of doubt and bewilderment, we, as daughters of the American Revolution, may well ask what should be our attitudes and hopes. There should be a clear realization of the fact that this nation has attained the highest standard of living yet known to the world through the freedom of the individual and under the liberties guaranteed by the Constitution of these United States. For ourselves, for our immediate service can be greatest through a calm faith, a freedom from pettiness and partisanship, a patriotism without prejudice, and a determination to undertake fulfillment of our own expectations that a people of widely different origins and characteristics can be welded together under the principles of freedom into a nation of united purpose. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions?
Just a comment. When Linda Bennett retired from the library, she sent over a lot of material that had been stored there because there was no other place to put it. And she sent over volumes of things from the D.A.R.
Yes, yes, and we have them upstairs.
No, somebody came and took them.
Oh, I talked to Linda, and she said the volumes that they had over there at the library were tossed away by a previous librarian.
Well, several volumes came.
They might be, Connie just told me tonight, they might be the Historical Society. Now, the research volumes that she did, that were bound, are not there. I did talk to Bill Filson, they are not there.
Well, somebody from the D.A.R. came and got them and said they had to be stored at the headquarters.
And they are.
And
And
Washington,
I've talked with our state historian.
In Harrisburg.
Harrisburg, okay.
Yeah. So that
Some of the stuff is there.
some of it is there. And like I said, the volumes of research that she did, our state historian told me, are in the archives in Washington. So those are safe. And they are accessible. Any of us can go down and visit and do research with them. So they are available, Skip, somewhere.
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 It'd be better if they were upstairs, but.
Oh, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it? Yes, Lillian.
Chris, you said patriotism died off in the 60s.
Wayne.
Wayne, what do you base that on?
I based that on because I was a child. I had two brothers in Vietnam War, one at the very beginning and one at the end, and they were treated very disrespectfully. I saw on the news every night, well, not every night, but often, burnings of flags. And as a child, that to me, I didn't understand protesting then. And I understand protesting a little better, but I saw that as patriotism waning. I disagree. Do you disagree?
Well, I think we've become a global country, and with that, in our freedom to discuss different positions, I think some of us starting in the 60s, became more aware of what patriotism is and how you define it, where perhaps we get a more narrow view of you were either this or you were that because you were a United States citizen. But there are different countries that express patriotism differently, and I think we've had to compare ours and adjust as we became global, as we traded and so on. So I don't know that I disagree, I just think it's a narrower perspective of patriotism.
And possibly even actually, because of that, like you said, a more expanded view of patriotism coming out of that Vietnam War era.
Well, I think that lately that we've had, you know, kind of a resurgence of patriotism. And one of the things that has really helped is that like Ancestry.com has that program on TV, Who Do You Think You Are, and the Roots program. And that has really, our headquarters down in Washington, D.C., we have a very extensive library down there. And since they have been doing that, there have been many more people that are coming down there to look, to try to find their roots and where they came from and things like that. And so I think that there has been recently kind of a returning to some of that, which is really good. So.
Well, I see that even in our genealogy. Do you not, Jane, see that? It seems like more and more people seem to be searching to come and grasp their ancestry.
What D.A.R. chapter do you belong to?
The Venango chapter, which is based in Franklin. Many of the women who were still here when the chapter disbanded went to Venango. They also went to Pymatuming, which is based in Sharon. And there's one or two ladies went to Punxsutawney, where they were close to.
They have relatives there.
Anybody else?
I don't know if anyone went to Butler or not, but that would be.
I hadn't heard, but that would be another local chapter in Butler. That's just
I happen to belong to the Fort McIntosh,
Okay.
D.A.R. in Beaver. And I went down there because I have two cousins who belong.
And that's still a little bit of a drive. Now, there is one thing I would like to say that I neglected to. If any of you ladies are interested in becoming a member of D.A.R., I do have a member's interest form you can fill out. And if you don't want, you could take that with you. I'm a volunteer here, so if you don't mind, they could drop it off here and I could pick it up. And someone would get in contact with you.
There has also been interest in starting a new chapter again in Grove City. And so they need to have at least 13 people that would be interested in reforming the chapter. I don't know whether they're wanting to reinstate it as U Mercer or whether they're wanting to start a new one. I haven't heard what that.
It was still
Kind of.
yes, in balance.
In
Yes.
balance,
Yes,
yeah.
because you can see the great history the General Hugh Mercer chapter had in this country, or in this county, but also some of the members like Lorena Montgomery, who did so much not only for our chapter, but our community, our county, and she would be another possible name. So, yeah, that's kind of in the balance. Okay.
I found it interesting that you noted the 23 maple trees up Main Street.
Yes.
The only other time I had heard of that, my father and I were driving into town from that area, and I said I loved those large trees on Main Street, and he said, well, there's a tree there for each one of the soldiers that was killed, and he told me the story. And when I mentioned it years later to my brothers, they said, he never told us that story. They didn't think it was true, so I'm glad it was reaffirmed there.
Yes.
But, because he grew up, he was a Gray, and he grew up where everything from the motel to Walmart and over to 208 was great
their
property, and there again. And then my other ancestor was the Pearsons, and that was a Revolutionary War.
Yes, and
Yes,
there's, yeah, one of the ladies,
Exactly.
probably one of your ancestors.
yes,
Your relatives are there.
yeah.
Oh, that's exciting. But I have never heard that story, and I'm reading the historian's record, and Mike, my husband,
Yes,
it was
it's
really
interesting.
And I was very disappointed not to be able to find anything at the Borough building about.
I think they just cut them down because there were trees at the time, but when they were planted, it was a big
But
deal.
there was nothing there.
Are there any of them left?
Skip, I'm thinking there has to be. There's
Maybe
some
one or
huge,
two, maybe
by the
one or
park,
two.
there's some
Yeah,
huge maple trees.
that's where,
Because
because it went clear to the George Jr.
that
is where
should
it
be
came in.
made known to try and prevent the borough from cutting them down.
Taking
Yes.
it down.
I remember
Because
that.
any tree just gets cut down.
Yeah, I remember that.
Depends on how much electricity you have going through those wires.
Are the
Because they
wires
cut one
on
down,
that side?
well, there was a tree up on Gilmore, right, just past Lincoln School, that they took down 2 years ago. And they said had been there for 500 years. But they took it down because that street and then up to Trinity Nursing Home is where the high wire, or the high voltage wires are.
Yeah,
So, up in front of Fred Burke's house, yeah,
So of course, the standing people are the first to go.
of course, of course.
Chris, you mentioned their meeting at the Pengrove Hotel. What was the other Colonial?
The Colonial.
Does anybody know what, heard of
That wasn't there a colonial hall on the campus?
I didn't put that together, Skip.
I just
But
wondered if anybody here knew what the
I have seen
Colonial
in the
was.
old books that we have, the old business advertising, there was something called the Colonial. Unbelievably, they didn't have an address.
It's East Main across from, the church.
Yeah, that's where
That's the
Colonial
old
Hall used to
Colonial
be.
That was
Yeah.
Colonial.
That was it?
Middle school.
Mhm.
Yeah,
There was a
What it was
single
called.
family.
Yes, there's, yeah.
yes.
It was a main, it was a main.
Everything was.
Okay.
Oh, there are refreshments here.
Yes, thank you so much.
Can you tell us a little bit about your
That
artwork?
was about.
Oh, yes, if anybody wants to hear.
Beautiful.
This, the little apple core at the top right is the winner for one of the national, there's several categories that the American Heritage Contest has for D.A.R. nationally. And I won the, let me get this right, the district, the state, district, and the national. And also the Evelyn Cole Peters Award. It was, I'm still thrilled about this. And this is my little pin. This is fiber art. It's come out of the quilting world, but instead of just making bed quilts, some of us have decided that it's time to make pictures and do something different. I don't like working with brushes, so painting was not a choice for me, but I did like the tactileness of fabrics. And I love painting with fabric, so that's where this came about. You'll also see in the back counters is bobbin lace. And I was very bored with making etchings, so I decided to try my hand at design, and that's where the bobbin lace designs back there came from. But the art quilts I have been doing for 3 years, bobbin lace since '97.
Beautiful. They are very gorgeous.
So may I hand out these?
So interesting. I imagine everybody else did too, and I'm so impressed
with all her research on that. I'm hoping maybe you're gonna put a copy of that speech up in your community.
Oh, I could do that.
Oh, that'd be great.
I could take
You
out
know,
my
we
little
need to-
notes and.
Yeah, if you don't mind, we'd love to have that.
And then this is the Constitution.
There's a lot, oh, there was a lot of information. You need to go back to certain.
Yeah.
This is also a handout.
Yeah.
Which one, Jake? Oh, Richard.
He's in the way we were, but I didn't know.
How many were in the Hugh Mercer chapter when they dissolved?
When they dissolved, I don't know, I did not find that information, but it had to have been less than 13. I wonder when,
Well, they couldn't get anyone who wanted to be in
and I know it's still hard today.
It is still hard to get.
It's that way in every word. Alice came down. Yes, she She did. She did. Alice was a very good friend of mine. She and her husband. And she gave some of them to her son. And she gave like the Pearsons to my sisters. The Ewers went somewhere. So, I mean, she just didn't do the McDowell, the Klein family. She did every family that was close to her.
Some of those genealogies came to our genealogy section.
And maybe some ended up in the large genealogy, which is Mercer County Historical Society.
This was
I mean,
more
no
her
offense to
style.
I think Alice joined us.
Yeah.
Alice Guarnieri also.
The historian's reports go to 1958, go to 1958 that we're here. And so that's what I based the early years here. But some of the scrapbooks remain from the later years. And there's pictures with Alice and Miss Square in several, of the yearbooks that are up there. And she is listed as regent in quite a few years, actually.
My grandmother, Margaret Hunter, was the regent at Heimatumi. And so when she would go a lot of places with people from Mercer.
Yes.
And so we would visit back and forth between them because they were good friends.
Yeah, I was interested in the research. Heimatumi, Greenville, not Greenville, Newcastle.
Newcastle.
She
Let's see.
us with Miss.
Oh gosh, there were several, like Eblenton, all of these little chapters would come together here at Grove City.
That's how she
And
remembers how
then
I
they
put
do
my
things
names.
together. And the thought
She
was,
comes along 50 years.
well,
If she's
they,
invited, she comes.
I know, it's another county.
yeah, I think it's a little bit further away and
Are your applications as difficult as the son's
they're worse.
applications are?
It depends.
I just got
Can I see it?
application
Can I
back
see the application?
that I had sent in, and I put parentheses on it, and I wasn't supposed to send them back. I have to take the parentheses out.
I have a form of interest.
Oh, I see.
Well,
And the spaces to put them on the
This is
son's
just if you're interested,
like this.
if you're interested in coming in and build this
it
out.
is, it is.
Take that
You
period
can
out.
send it to them, give it to me.
Well, now they're starting a new electronic application. And with it, everything has to be exactly correct on it, or else it won't go into the system. And so now it's even worse than, everything has to have the right
It's up there,
abbreviation
Gary's
and.
cousin.
We were wanting to get applications
So,
for our
my grandmother's
granddaughters.
fourth son.
Well,
Yeah, so Gary,
Well, I'm a registrar, and I would be willing to help anybody that
And if you go through this
anyone that would
grandmother,
want
you
any
might
help,
find
because that's
that
what
you
my
have
job is
ancestor
now.
or patriarch.
It's interesting to find out.
I didn't know I had any.
I have to get with Jane and get on that area and get to find out who we are.
That's the Patriot.
And I know how
Yes,
to.
Yeah, good for
my
her.
application for her.
Oh, sweetheart.
Now, but do you know where he served at? Do you know what, did he serve in Pennsylvania? Do you know where he served?
This was in Chapel, North Carolina. Sheila May, she did it for us.
I know I'm not read it, my dad's.
That's what I know.
I know I'm not on my dad's side, but any chance, and I want groceries, I have to go back.
All the information.
I'm gonna say probably.
I know they went to Civil War, but I don't know if they went prior.
She was in Missouri for her high school.
And you might be as surprised as I was, I had ancestors on the Mayflower. So they're like, what?
And you need whatever I can find?
Is that what
Oh my, that's a lost art.
And I thought my earliest ancestors came over in 1635, and I started researching that and D.A.R. and discovered we're related to the Caps. We're related to
I live in
the
Wilmington,
Brewsters.
so I live really close.
The one thing that
Well, I teach school I teach 8th grade science. So most of the time I teach in the